That, are we ready? Let's go. We tell our youth that knowledge is power, but they see that power comes from money. And we tell our youth to get involved, but they can't vote. So how can anything change if so few people control so much money? And how can you make a change if you can't vote? Well, power may come from money, but change comes from people. And what we're doing at First Root is we're building the world's first platform for democratic financial decision making in schools. How? We go to a school and we give students a real money budget. And I want to stress that it's real money. And we support the students as they decide how to invest it, not the parents, not the teachers, but the students. The students make the choice. So students make real change happen in their school with real money. They harness money power. Now, it's time for a more normal presentation because that's kind of the one that's designed to get you really thinking about what we're doing at First Root. A little bit about me. Those are my kids. I live right in the middle of Sunnyvale near Las Palmas Park. As Nancy said, I'm a serial entrepreneur. I've spent most of my time in the software industry in a style of software development known as agile software development. I've written 4 books, and I've also started a nonprofit, Every Voice Engaged Foundation. And what we do is we use a technique called participatory budgeting, and it's designed to teach financial literacy, but it's also designed to cover a few other important elements. I would also point out that we're a benefit corp, and if you don't know what a benefit corporation is, you may know one through your use. Patagonia, if you've ever heard of the company Patagonia, they make clothing, but they have a public benefit as opposed to just trying to make money. So most corporations are organized around one principle: how much money can we make? A benefit corporation is actually organized around creating a public benefit for the world or for a defined geographic area. And it's a slightly different organizational structure. Now, participatory budgeting is a democratic process that goes through 5 distinct phases. So it's not like we walk up to kids in high school and say, hey, here's some money, figure it out. We actually want to go through some phases. The first phase is designing the process. And in that phase, the kids will decide who is involved and what is the theme. The theme of the process might be improving school safety, or it might be creating opportunities for better SAT prep, or reducing stress or social emotional wellness. Then the students will create proposals or ideas that are associated with the theme. Those proposals are then refined because there's real money involved. So we have to know how much the proposal is going to cost, and we have to know who needs to be involved in implementing it. Then the participants or the students involved will vote, and the winning proposals will be funded and implemented. Now, in that process, you can see it actually teaches financial literacy because you have to know how much something costs, but it also teaches civics because we want to move from thinking about what is good for me to what is good for us or the community or the school. And for those of you who are involved in design thinking, it's a problem-solving technique that really emphasizes understanding the problem, creating ideas, refining those ideas, and then selecting those ideas. So design thinking is supported throughout this process. Now, the reason we're doing this is that we have massive economic inequality around the world, and the United States is the world's most economically unequal country. And there's a book, The Spirit Level, where social scientists looked at a whole range of factors from obesity and trust to imprisonments, drug addiction. And what they found is that in every single area, the more unequal the country, the worse the country performs. And the United States is pretty much the worst in every dimension. We have the lowest levels of trust. Now, it might seem weird to talk about trust and why that would be a problem, but let me give you an example from my career as an international business person. When I'm signing a contract in the United States, it's pages and pages and pages of legal wording and, who's going to do what, and what happens if this thing goes wrong. I've done literally multi-million-dollar deals in Europe and specifically in Sweden and Denmark, where it's been nothing more than a handshake, where someone says, okay, we want your company to do this work for us. And I said, okay. And I remember one time I was in Denmark and I said, okay, we're going to do this work. And I said, okay, I guess we need a contract, right? And the person who I was negotiating with said, oh yeah, you're an American, I guess you need that. And I said, well, I don't really need one. And they said, okay, great. Are you going to do the job? And I'm like, yeah. And then I was like, okay, then that's fine. So it's really interesting when you think about trust. You normally think about trust within, say, a family unit or at school, but when a society itself has a low level of trust, it manifests in many subtle ways that are actually not healthy for the society. Now, the other thing that's motivating us to do First Root is that the number of people who say it is essential to live in a democracy continues to decline. And the latest data from the United States says that we're lower than 25% now. And you can see this in the degradation of our political process, most pointedly at the national level. And many of us are very disappointed in the Congress right now because they just can't seem to get things done. Now, the good news is that we have local politics, and a lot of politics are the politics of the school or the politics of the city or the politics of the state, where you can still see a positive impact from democratic work. But it's these kinds of trends are very, very concerning to the future of our democratic society. Now, PB is already working in hundreds of schools. We did a project a few years ago in Sunnyvale Middle School, and the kids ended up choosing a 3D printer. At Overfelt High School in San Jose, they were given $50,000 and they did such things as finding driver lessons. In Phoenix, they're giving schools, every school in the district gets some money, and they're doing really important things like renovating school cafeterias. So there's a lot of evidence that kids, when given money, do good things. Now, PB is growing. I've got a few other states here, but I'm also going to point out that there's curriculum associated with participatory budgeting, and there's the Fremont High School, where we have a PB program going right now for those of you at Fremont with Mr. Kakis, and it's a pilot program with just a small group of students, and if that goes well, we hope to expand it to the entire school later this year. Now, on average, students are given $2,000 to $50,000, and it's usually a little smaller than that. So we want enough money for the kids to do something useful, but not so much money that the parents are going to get involved if something goes wrong, because everyone makes the best choices they can with their money. That doesn't mean that everything works out. So there's lots of different sources from money, from education foundations and PTAs, principals. We're doing a project in San Mateo right now in the Hillsdale High School in San Mateo, and a Salesforce executive contributed $1,500, and Salesforce's corporate social responsibility program matched that contribution. So the kids at Hillsdale have $3,000 at their disposal. So there's lots of options of where kids can get money. Now, how does it work? It's an app. So the teacher or administrator will create an account and they'll configure the program. And once it's configured, they'll send out an invite. And we've modeled it for those of you on the phone call who are younger, you may use Discord. So we've modeled how our program works at times like Discord or Among Us or Instagram. And so the teacher will configure the program, they'll send out an invitation, and then students can come in and create, refine, vote, and fund the proposals. And then the teacher will purchase the student-funded proposals. In general, we would recommend that you work on what are called capital expenses, or things that are more physical. Operating expenses are things like ongoing expenses, and it's hard to create an ongoing operating expense for a school, and it's easier to use the money for something that is tangible and physical. So here's some screenshots of our app. As you can see, it's got a nice light feel. It's hopefully engaging and easy to use. Here's some examples of what the voting looks like. So for example, if the new idea is to get some microscopes for the science lab, you can see that of the $1,000 budget, choosing this item will consume this amount of money. And again, it's real money. This is not fake money. And we want to make sure that the students know that this is real money. Now, we're building civic engagement into First Root. And what we're going to be doing over time is we're going to allow kids in schools across the state, across the country, across the world to collaborate to manipulate and manage larger sums of money. So let's say that we give each school in California $10,000. Well, there's more than 3,000 high schools in California. And what we would see is the kids in California would have $30 million at their disposal for making improvements in whatever they chose. I don't know what kids would choose with $30 million. I have a belief that it would be awesome. And I'm hopeful that we can implement this in such a way that we can find out what kids would do when they have a ton of money. Now, as part of my background, Nancy mentioned that I have been doing this for a while. My last company used participatory budgeting with businesses, and we helped them administer more than $3 billion in portfolio spends. Some of these names I'm sure you know, BMW or Cisco or eBay. Then in 2012, I started a nonprofit to work with cities and schools, and I sold my company Contenio in May of 2019. I completed the integration tasks. And when someone describes you as a serial entrepreneur, that means you start a company and you either make sure that someone else runs it or you sell it and then you start another one. So First Root is another company that I'm starting. I would like to point out that some of you may be aware of some of the United Nations SDGs, or the Sustainable Development Goals. Participatory budgeting is endorsed by the United Nations, and they correlate participatory budgeting to 7 of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. So there's a large amount of people around the world doing participatory budgeting. If you go online, you'll find participatory budgeting being done in Africa, in Europe, in Scotland, in Pune, India, in Mexico City, Mexico, in Bogota, Colombia, so Toronto, Canada. So you'll start to see that this is really growing around the world. So at this point, I'm gonna stop. It's a pretty quick presentation, but this hopefully gives us an opportunity to answer your questions, get your thoughts. My hope is that everyone on this phone call would want to be motivated to see how we could bring this into a school that you're in, if you're a student, or if you're a parent, how could we bring this to a school that you're associated with or that you might support? And of course, thank you, Nancy, for inviting me. It's really wonderful to be talking. This is what I do for a living. I was talking this morning, giving this almost this exact same deck at 7 in the morning to a bunch of my friends in India. So, you know, this is my second deck for today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Luke. Well, when I heard you speaking as Sunnyvale Rotary, and I had actually, for my questions, I've been aware of your work at San Jose and had done some reading about what happened in Brazil. So yeah, I was asking the background questions there, and thought, that since you gave a call out to be connected with schools and maybe get some more engagement, I thought that this might be an appropriate venue. And I see that Pranay has his hand up and he has a question.
Yeah, I do. So I heard that obviously you're trying this as a pilot program at Fremont. I was wondering what steps, I guess first off, like what would a successful program at Fremont look like? And then what steps did you have in place, or what plan did you have in place to expand this later into the district? Because I'm a member of Limbrook's Associated Student Body, and I'm currently actually running to be our treasurer. And so this is something that I'd love to help implement going forward.
Yeah, so I could give you a really like fancy and polished answer, but I'm not a super fancy and polished guy. So I'll tell you the truth. When you're building software as a startup, a successful pilot is like the software doesn't crash, right? And, you know, students have a good experience. Now I'm being a little extreme. You know, we're not going to build software that's going to crash because that's not good for anyone. But a successful pilot, Pranay, really is just the students can go through the process. They can create proposals, they can refine proposals, they can vote on proposals, and they see them implemented. And that to me is really the final step. If all you do is vote and you don't actually see something change, then we're once again in the part of the deck that I started with, which is, you know, anyone who's civically engaged wants to see a positive change in the world. And that positive change can be really, really big or small. It doesn't really matter. Like, you know, Nancy mentioned some of our work in San Jose. One of the positive changes we did in one of our projects in San Jose was we just bought new soccer nets for one of the parks. And it only cost $600. But for that community, having new soccer nets was really meaningful. And it was really important that they could do that for their park. So for me, a successful project, a successful pilot is one in which the students walk away going, we were able to do something. As far as Lindbrook is concerned, you can email me offline and we could do something small immediately this year, or we could work together and plan for something starting in the fall. Everything's okay for that. So I mean, over time, we would love to have all of the Fremont Union High School districts, but all of the schools associated with this involved. Oh, we got lots of hands up, including a baby's hand, which is a real amazing accomplishment. So I might pick Brevin only because.
Oh, well, Ritu is actually up next. So we'll go with Ritu first, then Brevin.
Okay, great.
Yeah, one question that I had was, what tends to be the scope of these students' projects? And I'm sure that this would vary, of course, based on how much money they're given. But you were like giving some examples of operational versus the other type of projects they would do. And I'm like curious, on the whole, what do you see students tending to do?
Yeah, what we've seen other students select in different participatory budgeting programs, they range from things that will improve the student experience at their school. So we're working with a high school in Indianapolis, Purdue Polytechnic High School, and their students bought a pergola because they wanted a nicer place outside. And what's interesting about that is if you think about how corporations get the best results, one of the things that happens is you want to ask the people who are most associated with the problems that might be experienced. In adult terms, we call this feet on the street, right? The people who are closest to the problem or the environment are the people who are best positioned to know what's going on. No adult at the Indianapolis High School would say, let's get a pergola for when we eat our lunch, because they eat indoors. What's really exciting about that is in New York City, 2 years ago, the students voted in their participatory budgeting project to upgrade their bathrooms. And when that actually bubbled up to the principal was shocked. And she said, this is not something the students should have to pay for. The students should have good bathrooms. And they were simply unaware because the teachers go to different bathrooms than the students. And so, you know, we've seen a wide range of initiatives supported by students, buying new, one group in Phoenix bought guitars for the band because the band it had all these musical instruments, but it didn't have an electric guitar. And everyone's like, we should have an electric guitar in the band. So they bought an electric guitar. It's up to you, right, as a student leader to pick what's appropriate. But as long as the proposal meets the school's guidelines, like for example, you couldn't, I'll be silly. And when we did the program at Sunnyvale, one of the ideas submitted by a student was a duck pond. Okay, we're not going to put a duck pond in Sunnyvale Middle School. One idea was buying new bleachers for the track, a great idea outside of the budget. And that's part of the learning process, right? How much things cost is part of the learning of financial literacy.
Now it's Brevin's turn. Thank you for the question, Ritu.
Yes.
And then after Brevin is Aditya H.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you for complimenting my profile picture. And second, you mentioned a lot that you give power to the youth through providing them with funding. So I guess my question is, where did you get this money from and how?
Yeah, so I want to go back to that because that is an absolutely essential question, right? Is okay, if you're going to give kids money, if you're going to give the youth money, where does the money come from? Well, I'll take some more time on this one. The first step is to ask your principal or the school district. Most principals have what's called a discretionary fund. And discretionary funds are actually critical for any large organization to function, and schools are large organizations, because you cannot budget to a penny everything that's going to happen. You need always a little buffer and slack. So school principals are given a budget by the district, and that budget covers things like salaries and materials and et cetera. But there's always a little bit of buffer that the principal has. So the first step would be to ask the school principal. The second is we have PTAs, PTOs, and education foundations. And many times we have found that the PTA doesn't know what to do with the donations that are given to them. And so what the PTA does is they just walk up to teachers and say, hey, we've got a little bit of leftover money. Give us a grant proposal and we'll fund you. And that can range from materials to whatever teachers come to the PTA with. So we have found it was successful to go to the PTA and say, hey, do you have a few $1,000s that we could put into the hands of the kids? And there's a high school in Oakland that we're going to start a program with, Skyline High School, and their PTA had a few $1,000s that they didn't know what to do with. And so that's the second source. The third source is the corporate social responsibility program, and that was coming in through Salesforce. That was the description and the story that I made with Hillsdale that we're doing right now. The fourth source is kids on student councils will sometimes raise money, and they'll raise money through things like a GoFundMe or a fundraiser. This one, some banks and some credit unions will donate money to schools for specific projects. And then there's a set of nonprofit partners that have sometimes money to devote to these kinds of activities. So there's lots of sources to get funds for this. And the funds do have to come from somewhere, right? We can't make it up. There has to be real money.
Thank you, Luke. Next up is Aditya H.
Hey, Luke. Well, first things first, I think this is a brilliant idea just because of how a lot of times when we want to implement changes, we're thrown off because we don't have capital, right? So I guess I just had a couple of questions for you. The first thing is, how are you guys operating during the COVID-19 pandemic? Obviously because you can't really, the things that you can fund right now are definitely less than what they would be if we were in person. Like we can't, for school supplies and like for facilities and stuff like that. So, what kind of projects are people funding at the pilot at Fremont right now?
Well, I actually don't have that answer for you real time. I can tell you I'd have to run a report on our system, and I should have been more prepared for this. I should have imagined that question. I didn't. I apologize. So I can, Nancy, I'll send you I'll take an action item to kind of do a report on what's being done at Fremont. And Fremont is only in the proposal stage. They haven't yet selected through voting, but I'll send you the Fremont high school proposals. In terms of the implementation, part of the reason I'm building this software application is precisely because of COVID. All of the previous PB programs that have been done in person. And so you're seeing a lot of them fail because they can't do PB in person and COVID. So the app is designed to promote collaboration even in the time of COVID. Now, my vision is I'd love for, and I realize I'm giving a very privileged statement here, but in the Bay Area, we tend to have a more affluent society and a more affluent culture. So a lot of kids in the Bay Area have smartphones. So I'd like you to be able to go to your school campus with your smartphone and interact with this app while you're standing and talking with your fellow students. In terms of the implementation, usually the implementation can be done without an impact to the students as part of the normal process. So let's say, for example, you decided that you wanted to get a new, let's go with the guitar example for the band. Once that's chosen, the teacher's going to buy the guitar, and then next year, hopefully when we're back in school, you would find that the guitar is part of the new band equipment. So I think a lot of the actual implementation of the items will be naturally done without too much restrictions from COVID.
And my second question was, with any sort of app or a platform like this, there's a lot of risks of misuse and such things. And my question was, what measures do you have in place? Or is it your job to handle misuses? Like, for example, if money is raised for a certain campaign and it's given, but the changes are not implemented, basically the money's not used for the purpose it's allocated for. Is there any sort of measure to prevent these kinds of actions from happening?
Man, if I had a gold star, I'd give you one. I think that's brilliant and I love it. Part of my background in being a serial entrepreneur is I used to be head of engineering and product management for an Israeli security company. And I got to tell you, when you work for Israelis and you work in the security space, you learn the thinking. And it's really hard what you just did. I give you a lot of credit because when you're building software, we only think of our positive applications or our positive ideas, and yet anything has a negative outcome, and you want to build that mental skill to go through it. So there's a lot of misuse. Let me start with what you talked about, and then I'll add a few more about what could happen. In general, in a society, the more transparent the society, the greater the degree of democracy. So I'll say it again. In general, in societies, the more transparent the society, the greater the degree of democratic processes. So dictators win because they hide everything. They have secret bank accounts. They have secret structures. They hide money, right? That's like a classic move of a dictator. How do crooks work? Well, crooks launder money. They create shell companies. They put them offshore. So the primary mechanism that we're going to be implementing on the raising money that is not implemented is when those votes are made and the votes are ratified, students can go back to the app and look at the status of every one of those votes. And you can say, hey, to the administrators, and so let's say I don't know if Peter Allen, I'm just going to look at him because he's clearly got a beard, right? So let's say that Peter is the teacher who's associated with the program. Well, once your school makes your choices and Peter ratifies those votes, he is now responsible for helping steward the implementation of those things, and that's in the app. If he doesn't update that app, that's been implemented, you can go back to the app and say, what is the status of every one of our choices? And so the more the macro principle that we're implementing is a principle of transparency, because transparency makes it harder to do bad things. And that's a really fundamental democratic principle. Now, there's other risks of misuse. For example, let's say that we get, I'll be really candid because it's easier to talk. $10,000 in one school is interesting, but not a really interesting target. $30 million for all the schools in the state of California, that's not only interesting, that's an interesting target for bad people. So we're putting in a lot of security practices. I don't want to go into them, but I know how to build financial systems and financial security practices to make that appropriately secure against those kinds of attacks. One thing that you didn't talk about is, what if a kid put an offensive proposal into the system? Well, we've also got security safeguards where, for example, when you submit an image, it's routed to Amazon Web Services, image recognition. If it's flagged as potentially offensive, it gets quarantined. Any kid can report a proposal as potentially offensive. It goes into a quarantine, teachers can review it, and then we can turn it into a discussion. If it was offensive, why? If it's really not offensive, why? Right? It can be edgy, but not offensive, and that's a fine line. But I'm really glad you brought up those points, because for me, the primary goal is to create transparency, because transparency promotes democratic engagement.
And I'm really sorry, but I just had one more quick question. I think this is a great idea, but I had a question about expansion in the future. I know that a lot of students are really innovative and creative, and their ideas for change go beyond just schools. And as far as that goes, you know, students are might be developing their own app to change something else that's more broad in the country or in their state. And I was wondering if you guys at First Root would be interested in implementing some sort of participatory budgeting program for more like ideas, almost like venture capital for students, but the students get to choose what they want to support.
Oh, heck yeah. You bet. We're in the process. We're probably 2 months away from open sourcing everything. So we'll have a set of APIs if you want to use our hosted service, if you want to download our code and manipulate your own code and build something out. Lots of different options on that. I have worked on, I would say that there are some solutions about participatory budgeting in cities. There's a project out of Spain called Consul, C-O-N-S-U-L, and there's another program out of the European Union called Decidum. And Decidum and Consul are both open source software and platforms for PB and like that kind of arena that you're talking about. The reason I'm focusing on schools is because I think those programs start too late. I think we need to build civics starting around 5th or 6th grade. And the other element is those programs are not compliant with the necessary laws that you need to work with kids. So in the US, we have things like FERPA and COPA, which are sets of regulations that govern how systems work with children. And Peter Allen, you're right. Cognitively, you can start looking at the development of financial literacy cognitively at around the age of 2. And that starts with that's a purchase request. Mom, I'm at the store and, you know, buy me the cereal or buy me apples. So cognitively, we're starting to realize wants and needs at the age of 2. So yeah, I mean, Aditya, I am totally on board with what you're saying. And I would be thrilled if y'all we're able to build on what we've created and extend it in ways that you think is important. Now, in terms of a kind of a student-driven VC program, super creative idea. I'd have to think about it. I love it though. I mean, I can kind of envision a future on that, and I think that's awesome.
Thanks, Luke. That was a great presentation. I don't see any more student questions. Typically, we meet typically at this time on Sundays anyway. So very dedicated, really dedicated young people here to give up their Sunday afternoons. And typically we have a breakout room. So I have them all created and everybody gets to choose their own breakout room. But what I want to do before I open the breakout rooms is ask the adults who are present to do a quick intro of who you are, who you're with, and any takeaways or questions you have. And then I'll open the breakout rooms and, you know, we can stay and answer questions and people can decide to stay or go. So Barry, yeah, we'll start with you.
I'm Barry Vickery. I'm the president-elect of the Sunnyvale Rotary Club. and thus have worked closely with Nancy. I retired to Sunnyvale 5 years ago after being a law school dean for 18 years back in the Plains part of the nation. So I did have one question, if I could, for Luke.
Sure.
Let me be sure I understand. All of the initial proposals come from students, correct?
That's up to the students themselves.
Okay.
We've seen kids in some programs allow the parents and teachers to submit
Okay.
proposals. That's a choice that the students make. We've also seen like restrictions based on grade level. Like, for example, in one school, the senior class kind of does like a present. I'm not going to say it right, but they kind of create a present for the future classes.
Sure.
So that particular PB cycle was restricted to just the seniors. So, and sometimes they do it the other way around. Only the students can create ideas, but the teachers and parents can also vote. So that's part of the democratic engagement and education process. Who do we want involved?
So here's my question now that I understand that. Having spent a couple of decades in educational administration, I'm aware that both administrators and teachers can sometimes manipulate students. And you could, for example, have a teacher who would get a proposal in the system that maybe the administration is opposed to. You could have an administrator who would maybe put a proposal into the process in order to free up money from the budget for other things. And so I assume you're going to rely on the democratic process to sort all of that out. But I also hope that in the process of education, perhaps people become aware that sometimes that's the way education politics works.
Well, I don't think it's education politics. I think it's all politics.
Right.
So I would say that this is the reason why I've made the decision since we last talked as a team. We're going to build our own curriculum, because I have yet to see a single civics curriculum with a corruption, an actual module on corruption and the history of corruption and the ways to combat corruption. But the reality is this, and everyone needs to hear this: the kids will sometimes make bad choices and the money will be wasted. Okay, I sometimes make bad choices and my money is wasted in my home. There's going to be corruption in various forms that exist, and it's going to happen. But I'd rather have that as openly talked about as I could, along with a class module that says, how could people manipulate the system? A teacher could say, if you don't vote for my proposal, I'm going to give you a failing grade. Okay, corruption. Let's talk about it. So Barry, I'm not here to solve that problem per se. I'm here to create an environment by which the problem can be solved.
Yeah, for what it's worth, I think that's exactly the right answer. Thank you.
Oh, okay. That's the only answer I have. Glad it's the right one.
Yeah, well, the law dean likes you, so there you go. The law school dean likes you, so that's great.
I just think the more people know about how the system works in real time, the better it is. And you're obviously onto that.
What's really interesting is, kids, what's interesting is, here's a number that's going to be shocking but true. I've got 3 million miles on American Airlines. I've like burned through passports getting so many stamps. And every country has their own flavor of things they don't like. There's no perfect outcome. There's no perfect society. There's just humans doing the best we can. And our kind of corruption in America is very different than the kind of corruption in other places. But the principles of transparency help fight it everywhere.
Fabulous. So
that's not very fast on your speedy intro. Sorry, Nancy.
No. I knew Barry had a question, so that's why we started with him. And he's always got good questions. So sticking with the Rotary theme, let's hear from Peter.
Hey everyone. Thanks all for taking the time on a Sunday afternoon, by the way, when it's beautiful outside, to be here on Zoom. So my name's Peter Allen. I wear a lot of different hats. Right now, one of the hats I wear, as Nancy mentioned, is as chair or co-chair of Interact in Rotary District 5170, which is the district that you're all in, even if you don't know it or don't know anything about what Rotary is. Rotary is an international service organization of more than 1.2 million people worldwide in 30,000 plus clubs, including my club, which is the West San Jose Campbell Willow Glen Club. But the thing that keeps me in Rotary is Interact, which is our youth wing, and it's focused primarily on high school and middle school students who are interested in serving and giving back to the community, and also just getting more engaged in their community. So we host leadership trainings and other sorts of events throughout the year that really improve leadership skills for local students. And give them an opportunity really to run their own show. I love actually Interact because for the most part, it's almost predominantly student run. I'm really just there to make sure things don't go off the rails, and they rarely, if ever, do. And I'm consistently impressed with how adept our people in, I'm not going to call you kids, people in other generations and younger generations, shall we say, are at being ready to lead and ready to take our world into new and exciting places. So I'm really excited about the work we do. I also have the unique position of having been the public information officer for San Jose Unified School District for a number of years. And so I've experienced this, the involvement of students in their schools from a very different angle. I was responsible for crafting or helping to craft our district's strategic plan when I was there. And as part of that, we did some outreach to leadership and ASB leaders at our schools. And I was very much a proponent of involving student voices in that conversation, because at the end of the day, you've got a bunch of adults, including your parents, making decisions that really impact you more than they impact anyone else, and they impact more than they impact the adults even. And when students are the ones who are the beneficiaries and or the victims sometimes of bad budgeting and of bad decisions made by adults, and you don't have a voice in the decision-making process, that's a problem. So as much as I could, I tried to involve while I was there student voices in the conversation. So that's why I think this is a great concept. I think it's something that could be applied at district levels. And I also work with some, at least one education nonprofit and a library. And my day job is with the San Jose Library Foundation. So I have opportunity to help, maybe take this concept out and get some support for it in certain areas. But I'm really excited by it. And like I said, this is, I highly encourage all of you, if you're not already, to get more civically engaged. It's not about, doesn't have to be about Democrat or Republican or any of that, really. It's just about, especially when it comes to local government, like I always like to say, potholes are nonpartisan. And it's the same with schools, really. It's not about, your ideology. It's really about making things better for you guys as the final users of the system, if you will, right? The customers. Some people try to treat the parents as the customers. The parents aren't the customers. You are the customers. So we need to do a better job of serving you. But if you're involved in that process, then I think all the better, and you'll get better outcomes. So that's my soapbox. But nice to see you all. Nice to meet you.
Yeah. Thank you, Peter. Next up, Linda, and then Forrest.
Hi, this is really interesting. I was just wondering if you've approached the council of PTAs in our community.
Not yet.
There's a okay.
Not yet. It's the angle of entry of a council and a PTA in the time of COVID has been very tricky, and I'm trying to be rather respectful of the demands that they're faced with right now. But absolutely, I think in my mind, there's a couple of organizations that would be kind of the preeminent partners. PTAs, way at the top. Rotary, way at the top. 4-H, way at the top. Local student governments, junior achievement, for example. There's positive youth development organizations. So if you have a mechanism by which we can talk offline, please email me or call me, and I would love to talk that through, because I think that parent teacher associations, it's more than money too, by the way. When I go to implement a proposal, we know the data shows that when parents are involved in schools are safer, schools are better, and students perform more effectively. So for, Linda, I'd love to see the PTA get involved in the implementation of proposals. And that can be time, right? There's, it doesn't have to be just money that's associated with creating something that's successful and civically engaged.
Mm-hmm. And there's also Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts and all that.
Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts. I mean,
But
there's,
yeah, we can talk offline.
yeah, there's a wide variety of American philanthropic organizations that are just fantastic. But yes, please contact me.
And so thank you. And so for the people that don't know Linda, she is an adult sponsor of the Youth Climate, or the Silicon Valley Youth Climate Action. So very,
great.
very busy with that.
Yeah,
then-
I'm also co-founder of Silicon Valley Youth Climate Action. That's a student-led organization.
Okay, so Forrest, tell us about your great self.
Thank you. Hang on, I got a little background. So I'm a researcher at Stanford. I'm a postdoc in civil engineering, and I'm in a research center that sits on the boundary with computer science and civil engineering. So that kind of means a lot of different stuff with what we work on. The things you propose are really interesting. Bringing democracy, as a real learning example to students seems really important, and getting the students' attention and voting. I can see a lot of the things that you brought out there. I don't have any specific question for that. I think you've answered all the questions at this point that could be brought up. But I do see a lot of value in what you've described.
Great. Yeah, and I'll just have you know that the breakout rooms haven't opened the last 15 minutes or so, and the students stayed to listen to the adults. So they were interested in talking with you guys. So students, you can go to your breakout rooms and you might get a visit from some adults who want to stay and talk to you. It's the new model, the newfangled model where you can pick out your breakout room, and
Okay.
there's a bunch of groups. So we can stay in the main level. The adults can to talk, or you can.
So I'm going to go ahead and jump into a breakout room real quick, because I was invited privately to be challenged, and challenging how you grow. So I'm going to go hang out with getting myself challenged with. We'll see if I survive.
And I'm going to stop the recording. Sorry, I didn't do that earlier. So
That's fine.
stop. Okay.